Welcome to Teolumen Insights, where we reveal the hidden forces that shape the way you live and show you how to use them to create real transformation and supercharge your health, mindset, and daily life. Here are your hosts, Emma Greenwood and Nathan Sinclair.
Believe it or not, what follows is an AI-generated conversation, one designed not to mimic humanity, but to illuminate it.
Okay, let's dive right in. Picture this. What if technology could actually, let us talk to people who've passed on? Or what if there are these, energy fields we could measure? Fields that genuinely impact your consciousness, even help plants grow.
Yeah, it sounds like science fiction, right?
Yeah.
But this isn't just speculation. This is actual, serious scientific research happening right now.
Exactly. And that's what this deep dive is all about today. We've got a ton of material notes, transcripts from a really fascinating conversation, research papers, all focusing on the work of Dr. Gary Schwartz.
Right. Dr. Schwartz, he's a pretty big name at the University of Arizona, a distinguished professor, and his background is, well, extensive. Psychology, medicine, neurology, psychiatry, even surgery.
Wow. Okay. Covers a lot of ground.
It really does. And his whole career has kind of been about building this bridge, between the really rigorous, data-driven science we see in academia.
Yeah, the standard stuff.
And these other areas, things like consciousness, subtle energy, things that often get labeled as maybe spiritual.
Stuff that usually stays way over there.
Exactly. And our mission today is to unpack all of that for you. We want to really dig into this source material, pull out the key insights, understand the actual data he's working with, the methods.
And what it all means, right? The implications. Yeah. We're talking synchronicity, those weird, meaningful coincidences, the potential for post-material communication using tech.
The soul phone idea.
Yeah. And validating these high consciousness fields, like the work he's doing with focused life force energy, or FLFE.
So yeah, lots to cover. It's going to be a fascinating journey unpacking Dr. Schwartz's work.
Okay, let's start with his approach. How does someone with that kind of academic background even tackle these, unconventional topics?
Well, what really stands out is how he describes himself. He calls himself an Orthodox agnostic.
Orthodox agnostic. Okay, break that.
It means he doesn't start by believing or disbelieving. His default position is basically, I don't know.
Right.
Could be yes, could be no. Show me the data. That's his mantra.
So it's all about the evidence, not about wanting something to be true or wanting to debunk it.
Precisely. It's a deep commitment to scientific integrity above all else. He's not trying to prove some spiritual point, and he's definitely not dismissing strange things just because they're strange. He just wants to know what's actually true based on the best evidence possible.
Even if that evidence points somewhere really unexpected outside the usual materialist box.
Especially then. And this really connects to a core principle for him. It's even the title of one of his books. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Ah, yes. Heard that one before.
Right. But for him, it's not just a saying, it's how he operates. When he looks at things like consciousness surviving death or subtle energy effects, he demands top-tier scientific rigor.
Like control groups, blinding, statistics, the whole 9 yards.
Absolutely. The same standards you'd expect in, say, a major drug trial or a psychology study.
Yeah.
He's taking these phenomena that are often just stories or beliefs and putting them under the microscope of the scientific method.
That's a really interesting stance, bringing that level of scrutiny to things most scientists might just ignore.
Yeah, and he has this great analogy he uses to explain how he approaches it. He says he's like a blind man who's decided to study color vision.
Okay. How does that work?
Well, he, the blind man, can't see color, right? He doesn't experience blue or red directly, but he listens seriously to the reports of people who can see.
So he takes their experiences like mediums reporting contact or people feeling energy as real data.
As valuable data points, yes. But because he's coming from that place of blindness, that lack of direct perception, he asks different kinds of questions. Questions someone who can see color might never think to ask because it just seems obvious to them.
Ah, I see. Because he doesn't have the subjective experience, he has to find objective ways to investigate it.
Exactly. It forces him to design unique experiments, look for objective measurements, test the reality of the phenomenon from that outside, initially blind perspective.
That must give him a really unique, objective viewpoint. Almost like a research advantage. It sounds like he has this deep respect, almost reverence, he calls it, for the scientific method itself.
He really does. He sees science as the best tool humanity has developed for figuring out what's real versus what's just wishful thinking or illusion. His loyalty isn't to proving something he hopes is true.
Like hoping consciousness survives, because that would be nice.
Right. He admits he might hope for things like that, things that seem good for humanity, but his job, as he sees it, is to put those hopes aside and just follow the data. Let the evidence tell the story, whatever that story turns out to be.
Okay, let's talk about one area where he thinks the data is telling a very interesting story. Synchronicity. We've all had those moments, right? Those weirdly meaningful coincidences.
Oh, yeah. The ones that make you pause and go, whoa, what just happened?
Exactly. But Dr. Schwartz isn't just noticing them. He's trying to actually define them, analyze them scientifically.
That's the key. His scientific definition is really specific. It's not just any coincidence that feels meaningful. It has to be an event, or usually a whole series of events, that are just so incredibly unlikely to happen together by random chance.
So it's about the math, the probability.
Absolutely. It's all about the statistics. If you calculate the odds of these things happening together randomly, and the probability is ridiculously low, like 1 in a million, 1 in 10 million, even less.
Then you can't just shrug it off as chance anymore.
Well, statistically speaking, you're forced to reject the null hypothesis, which is the idea that it is just random chance. Rejecting that means you have to infer that something else is going on, some kind of non-random process, some organizing principle or intelligence.
Something seems to be coordinating things behind the scenes.
That's the inference the numbers push you towards. Whether you want to label that higher power or collective unconscious or infinite mind, the statistical anomaly itself points away from pure randomness.
Okay, this sounds abstract, but there was that great personal story in the source material, the horse anecdote. That really made it click for me.
Yes, the horses. That's a perfect example of what he calls a type 1 synchronicity. A simple pair of events, but highly improbable.
So what happened?
He was in a conversation, I think it was an online meeting or something similar, and he noticed right behind the other person's head on the screen, there was this big, noticeable picture of a horse.
Okay.
And just as he's registering that, he looks around his own office, his own background, and realizes he also has a significant, meaningful horse image prominently displayed right there.
Whoa. Okay, yeah. The odds of both people in that specific conversation having a prominent horse image in their background simultaneously.
Pretty low, right? He actually tried to estimate the probability. He figured conservatively it was at least 1 in a million, maybe much less.
And for a scientist, 1 in a million isn't just, weird.
No, that's statistically significant. It's a data point that strongly suggests it wasn't just random chance. It forces you to consider that there might be some non-random connection, some coordinating factor at play.
So it's not just a feeling, it's the math pointing towards some kind of intelligence arranging things.
That's the interpretation the extreme improbability suggests. It's empirical evidence hinting at some kind of non-local coordination, making meaningful patterns appear. And he didn't stop there. He actually classified these things.
Right, the type 1, 2, and 3.
Exactly. Type 1, like the horses. A simple but very unlikely pair of meaningful events. Type 2, this gets more complex. Maybe a sequence of related improbable events or several pairs happening around the same time. The odds get even lower. Type 3, or super synchronicity. This is where it gets really mind-bending. We're talking 3 or 6 or even more incredibly improbable, meaningful events all clustering together in a short period. Like a constellation of coincidences.
A constellation, wow.
Yeah, and he argues that the level of coordination needed for that kind of cluster, the probability becomes almost infinitesimally small. It suggests not just non-randomness, but potentially a very high degree of intelligence and foresight orchestrating the whole sequence.
So it goes beyond just a nudge. It feels more like intricate design.
That's the feeling and the inference he draws from those extreme statistics. He said he's been tracking these super synchronicity streams since he was at Yale decades ago.
Really, documenting them.
Meticulously, trying to find patterns, calculating the combined probabilities. And he kept coming back to the same conclusion. Human minds alone couldn't possibly be planning and executing these complex, interwoven events. It led to his book, Super Synchronicity. He talks about the experience of living through these periods. It's filled with wonder, sometimes disbelief, definite awe, gratitude. That feeling you get when you sense an intelligence way beyond our own might be interacting with your life.
That must be profound. But trying to bring research like that into the mainstream academic world, especially back in the 70s or 80s, that sounds tough. How did he deal with colleagues who were probably pretty skeptical?
Oh, he was very careful, very strategic about it. For the most part, he kept that synchronicity research somewhat separate from his main academic work in psychology and medicine. He described it as sort of doing it with his left hand, not bringing it up constantly in faculty meetings or big conferences where it might just get shot down immediately.
Kind of picking his battles. Protecting the more out there work.
Pretty much. He did publish some papers, like one inferring a God process from synchronicity data in a journal focused on spirituality and clinical practice, places where there might be more openness. But generally, he shielded it from his more conventional colleagues.
Why? To avoid conflict.
Partly that, but also feeling that many people just weren't ready to grapple with the implications. He had other challenging work, like his mediumship research, which was already pushing boundaries within the university. He felt the synchronicity work was almost sacred in a way. It needed space to develop without facing hostility before the evidence was really solid, and maybe the cultural context shifted a bit.
It definitely has, right? Things that were totally fringe in 1975 seem less shocking in 2025.
Absolutely. There's much more openness now, even within science, to exploring consciousness and related topics. He trusted that process, that slow accumulation of data and shift in perspective over time.
Okay, speaking of shifting perspectives and pushing boundaries, let's talk about the soul phone. This seems like his most ambitious project, maybe the most well-known. It came out of his mediumship research, right?
Directly out of it, yes.
Yeah.
He spent years doing really rigorous experiments with mediums. People claiming to communicate with deceased individuals, he calls them post-material persons, or PMPs.
And he used strict scientific methods.
Oh, yeah. Blinding protocols, controls to rule out fraud, cold reading, even trying to exclude things like the medium just subconsciously picking up thoughts from the living person, the sitter.
And what did he conclude after all that?
He concluded that some mediums genuinely are receiving accurate information that seems plausibly only available to the deceased person. The data, the specific verifiable details that nobody living knew, just pushed him to accept that something real was happening there.
Wow. So he scientifically validated that it's not all trickery or grief-fueled imagination.
Based on his extensive research, yes. He concluded that conventional skeptical explanations just couldn't account for all the data from the best mediums under controlled conditions.
Okay, that's already a massive claim. But if some mediums are genuine, why put all this effort into building a technology, the soul phone? Why not just rely on the mediums?
Good question. There are a few key reasons. One, mediumship accuracy isn't perfect. Even the best mediums can have off days. The connection isn't always crystal clear.
Right, it's variable.
Two, there just aren't enough highly accurate, validated mediums to meet the need. Think about how many people are grieving, wanting some connection. Mediumship isn't scalable to help everyone.
Well, it's a supply and demand issue, basically.
Exactly. And third, and this is crucial for his scientific mindset, technology holds the potential for higher accuracy and, maybe more importantly, for objective, repeatable, undeniable evidence.
Something less subjective than a human medium.
Precisely. A successful soul phone could provide data that might finally convince the broader scientific community, the hardcore skeptics, that this communication is real. Plus, there's the potential not just to reach loved ones, but maybe connect with wisdom keepers, great minds from the past who might still have insights to offer.
And Dr. Schwartz actually has the background for this kind of tech challenge, doesn't he? It's not just psychology.
Not at all. His early training was actually in electrical engineering and physics, and his PhD work involved psychophysiology, measuring tiny electrical signals from the body and brain. So he has this deep understanding of detecting weak signals, filtering out noise, sensor technology. It's the perfect skill set for trying to build something like the soul phone. It's where his tech background meets his consciousness research.
Okay, let's clarify PMPs again, post-material persons. What does the mediumship data suggest they are?
Based on what consistent verified mediums report, PMPs seem to be individuals who've passed from their physical bodies but still have their consciousness, their personality, memories, energy, their identity.
So they're still them.
Yeah, mediums often perceive them looking just as they did maybe at their prime, sometimes with specific clothes or jewelry that confirms who they are. They appear as distinct individuals.
Okay, so that's the who. What's the grand vision for the soul phone technology itself? The ultimate goal?
The long-term vision is, well, it's mind-blowing. It's to use cutting-edge sensors, maybe combined with sophisticated AI for signal processing, to actually detect PMPs visually and auditorially.
Like seeing and hearing them?
Essentially, yes, real-time audiovisual communication. like a video call, but with someone who isn't physically embodied. He even used the term soul studios early on, thinking about the tech needed, like a recording studio for the non-physical.
Wow. Okay, that's a huge leap. Hard to even imagine.
It really is. But that's the far horizon. The step they're focused on right now, the more immediate goal, is the soul switch.
The soul switch, that's the starting point.
Yes. It's about creating a simple binary system, basically an on or off switch that a PMP can intentionally interact with and change its state.
Just yes or no.
Fundamentally, yes.
Right.
But the technical challenge is immense. They're trying to reliably detect incredibly faint signals of interaction, maybe down to the femtone oval that's minuscule, and distinguish that signal from all the background electronic noise.
Like picking out one specific whisper in a hurricane.
Great analogy. And it's not just about detecting a blip, it's about detecting it with super high accuracy, knowing that the switch flipped because the PMP intended it, not just random noise. They're aiming for, like, 97, 98, 99% certainty.
So the PMP focuses or intends, interacts with the sensor somehow, and the system says, okay, got it, with near certainty.
That's the idea. That's the soul switch. And if you can get one reliable binary switch working,
Then you can build from there.
exactly. The next logical step is what he calls soul texting.
Okay, texting with PMPs, how would that work?
You'd create an array of these super sensitive binary switches. Imagine maybe 40 of them arranged like a keyboard, either physically or virtually. If a PMP can reliably flip individual switches, they could, in theory, select switches in sequence to spell out words, letters, essentially typing a message.
That would be definitive proof, wouldn't it? You could ask a question, only they would know.
Exactly. That's the key. It moves from just detecting a presence to actual interactive communication. You can test for private knowledge, things only you and the deceased person knew, if they can answer specific questions accurately via this texting interface.
That's game-changing evidence.
It really would
Right.
be. It provides that two-way validation. And think about it, if they can interact with a sensor keyboard, maybe eventually they could interact with computers in other ways. But that's getting ahead of ourselves.
Okay, quick detour though. AI. It's exploding right now. Some people wonder if advanced AI, like large language models, could become a kind of medium itself, channeling consciousness. Did Dr. Schwartz talk about that?
He did touch on it. He finds the idea fascinating, but his practical focus has stayed on the soul phone. Why? Because he sees a clearer, more direct path to getting verifiable, definitive results relatively soon with the sensor approach.
Validating AI as a medium sounds
Tricky.
extremely tricky. How do you prove the AI isn't just simulating the deceased person incredibly well based on all the data it was trained on?
Yeah.
Right. It can mimic language patterns, access information online.
Exactly. Differentiating that from genuine PMP communication is a huge hurdle. That's why he keeps coming back to the importance of truly private knowledge for validation. Things the AI absolutely could not know from any database or online source.
Like a secret code word or a memory only the two of you shared.
Precisely. You'd have to test it with information that was never digitized, never spoken of widely. If an AI system claiming to be a PMP could answer that, well, that would be something. But the soul phone approach, detecting physical interaction with sensors, kind of sidesteps that specific AI validation problem.
Makes sense. So where's the soul phone project now? Is the soul switch working?
According to the source material, yes, they are past the proof of concept stage for the soul switch. They've apparently achieved results demonstrating they can detect a PMP's interaction with their sensors at those very high accuracy levels needed.
Seriously, that's huge.
It's a massive step. And for the next phase, the soul texting.
What's the timeline on that?
Yeah, this is where it gets really ambitious. But he stated his target is within the next 2 years.
2 years for texting with PMPs.
That's the goal he put out there. He was clear it depends on overcoming the remaining technical challenges, scaling it up to an array, ensuring it's robust and repeatable. It's an extraordinary aim, but he seems optimistic based on their current progress.
Wow. Okay, 2 years. That changes things. Let's shift gears a bit, though still related to this frontier science. Talk about his role with Focused Life Force Energy, FLFE. Becoming their director of research is a big commitment for an academic like him.
It really is, and it definitely signals how strongly he feels about the data he's seen. He approached FLFE just like anything else as that Orthodox agnostic, open-minded skeptic, ready to look at the evidence.
And FLFE makes some pretty big claims, right?
Yeah.
About high consciousness fields.
They do. They claim they can create and sustain these high consciousness fields remotely, like in your home or around your phone, and that these fields raise consciousness and have other positive effects. What apparently appealed to Dr. Schwartz was that FLFE seemed genuinely committed to science, to tracking data, to trying to validate their claims numerically.
So how did he start investigating that as their research director?
He started with what he calls Phase 1 studies, basically collecting and analyzing reports from actual FLFE customers. What were people spontaneously saying they experienced when the service was turned on?
What kind of things were people reporting?
A lot of consistent themes emerged. People often said they found it easier to shift out of negative thinking into positive states. They felt more forgiving, more peaceful, and interestingly, many reported feeling a broader sense of connection, thinking more about their pets, nature, the planet, not just themselves.
So phase 1 is about documenting the experiences, seeing if there's a pattern.
Exactly. Are these reports common? Do they seem linked to having the service active? Because obviously, if nobody's reporting positive effects, then you've got a problem right there, placebo or not.
But the immediate counter-argument is placebo. People sign up expecting something good, so they feel something good.
Absolutely. And Dr. Schwartz tackles that head-on. He's very clear. Phase 1 data, the customer reports, show that something is happening. People are reporting these things. But it doesn't prove why. The placebo explanation, it's all just belief or expectation, is a perfectly valid interpretation of Phase 1 data alone.
So how do you get past that? How do you know if FLFE itself is doing anything?
That's where you need Phase 2 studies, the gold standard, double-blind experiments.
Where nobody knows who's getting the real thing and who's getting a placebo.
Correct. Neither the participant nor the researcher knows who's in the active group versus the control group. That eliminates bias from expectation on both sides.
But that sounds really hard to do with humans for something like FLFE. People know if they signed up for it.
It is very challenging logistically for human trials with a service people actively choose. But even without perfect double-blinding in humans, the Phase 1 data can still be really revealing, especially when you look closely and combine it with other types of research.
Did he find anything in the human data that made him think it wasn't just placebo?
Yes, there was one key finding from a large study over 330 people that he called an anti-placebo indicator.
Anti-placebo, how does that work?
It sounds odd, but here's the finding. 2/3, 67% of the participants reported that the effects they experienced from FLFE were greater than what they had anticipated.
Huh. More than they expected.
Yeah. Think about it. If it's purely placebo, you generally expect people's experiences to match their expectations or maybe fall short. You wouldn't expect such a large majority to say, wow, this is doing more than I thought it would.
That's a good point. That suggests something beyond just positive thinking might be involved.
It strongly suggests it, yes. It hints that while your mindset might shape how you experience it, there could be an underlying effect from the field itself that's pushing beyond those initial expectations. But the really definitive evidence for him came from research that could be properly double-blinded.
Which was?
The plant studies.
Ah, right. Because plants don't have expectations.
Exactly. Plants don't get placebo effects. You can set up experiments where one group of plants is in the FLFE field, another identical group isn't, and nobody involved. Not the caretaker, not the person measuring growth, knows which group is which until the end. True double blinding.
And what did those plant studies show?
The source material says they showed statistically significant positive effects. Things like seeds germinating faster, plants growing taller, or having more biomass in the FLFE group compared to the identical control group. Objective, measurable differences.
And that's hard to explain away if the experiment is properly blinded.
Very hard. So for Dr. Schwartz, it was the combination. You have these compelling plant results from rigorous double-blind studies showing a real measurable effect on a living system. And you combine that with the human data, especially that anti-placebo finding where 2/3 exceeded expectations. Putting those together led him to conclude it's probable that the human effects are more than just placebo. The field itself seems to be doing something real.
So it's not just in people's heads. There's objective biological impact.
That's the conclusion the combined data points towards. And that's why he thinks this work, if it holds up, is potentially so incredibly important. If we found a way to reliably generate fields that positively influence living systems and consciousness,
The implications are huge.
huge for human evolution, health, healing, maybe even our collective ability to tackle global problems by working with some kind of larger intelligence or field.
Thinking about those implications, what did he envision the world might look like if these fields became really common, say half the population was experiencing them?
It's a pretty radical vision. He speculated about a fundamental shift. Imagine widespread increases in forgiveness, forgiving yourself, forgiving others. Imagine it being generally easier for people to move out of negativity, anxiety, anger, into more peaceful, positive states.
That alone would change a lot.
Wouldn't it? And also that tendency to think beyond just me, a natural expansion of care and concern to include animals, nature, the planet. It suggests a potential transformation of human society, not just through individual effort, but through the influence of the environment itself on this subtle energy level.
A different path to becoming, well, better versions of ourselves collectively. And you, the listener, actually shared your own story with FLFE in the source material, which kind of brings us down to earth.
Yeah, your experience was a great example. You were looking for help with EMF sensitivity, right?
Right, that was my main focus.
And you tried the free FLFE trial, not really knowing much else about what it claimed to do. But then you experienced these unexpected benefits, more energy, sleeping better, feeling more switched on.
Yeah, totally unexpected. I wasn't looking for better sleep or energy. So when that happened, it really felt like that anti-placebo thing he talked about. It wasn't driven by my expectation because I didn't have one for those effects.
Exactly. It's a perfect personal illustration of the phenomenon potentially going beyond anticipation. And your description of it feeling like an unconditional love field, plus the EMF help, all delivered non-invasively via quantum entanglement. It captures that user perspective well.
It definitely challenges how we normally think about things working.
And you also mentioned that data point from Clayton, one of the FLFE founders, measuring an average 40-point rise in consciousness scores over a year in their community. Again, we'd need the details on the scale and method, but it adds another piece suggesting measurable shifts are occurring.
It hints that it's not purely subjective. So, okay, for someone listening now, maybe they're intrigued by all this, the synchronicity, the soul phone possibility, the FLFE claims, but they're still skeptical, which is fair. What's the practical advice Dr. Schwartz would give based on his own approach?
He was really clear and practical about this. First, he'd say, try the free trial. FLFE offers a 15-day no-risk trial, no credit card needed. His point is, don't just take his word for it or our word for it. Experience it yourself. Collect your own data.
Direct experience is the best evidence.
That's the idea. Second, he'd encourage people, especially skeptics, to go look at the research on FLFE's website, see the studies, including the plant experiments. They're trying to be transparent about their science. Evaluating their methods and data is key for a skeptical mind.
Check the science for yourself.
Right. And third, he'd advise going into it with an open mind. Be open to unexpected experiences, things you didn't anticipate. Don't dismiss something just because it seems weird or wasn't what you were looking for. Maintain that Orthodox agnostic stance towards your own experience.
Allow for surprises, basically. Like my sleep and energy improving.
Exactly. It all comes back to being open to where the data, including your personal data, leads you. He even mentioned future research looking into things like inspiration deficit disorder and whether these fields could help promote creativity. It really loops back to that core theme of his.
The subtitle of his book.
Yeah, the science and ethics of truth-seeking and truth abuse. It underlines that all this exploration to the extraordinary has to be grounded in a rigorous ethical commitment to finding out what's actually true.
Okay, that was a lot. Let's try to recap this incredible deep dive. We started with Dr. Schwartz looking at synchronicity, those meaningful coincidences, and how the sheer improbability points towards some kind of non-random intelligence.
Right, using statistics to probe the edges of reality.
Then we got into the soul phone building on validated mediumship research to create technology, starting with the soul switch, aiming for PMP texting possibly within just a couple of years.
A potential technological bridge to consciousness beyond physical life.
And finally, his work with FLFE, using rigorous science, including double-blind plant studies alongside compelling human data, to investigate claims about high consciousness field measurably affecting living systems.
Yeah, really pushing the boundaries of what science typically considers real or measurable, challenging that purely materialist view.
So here's something to chew on, a final thought based on all this. If consciousness can exist beyond the body, as the soul phone research suggests, and if subtle energy fields can tangibly influence life and awareness, as the FLFE data indicates, how might knowing that change how you look at the coincidences or intuitive hits in your own life? And what could happen, individually and collectively, if we really started to engage with these possibilities, maybe even learning to work with these deeper levels of reality?
Big questions, questions that this kind of frontier science really forces us to confront if we approach the data with that open, agnostic mind.
Absolutely. So if you are curious, maybe check out that research Dr. Schwartz mentioned, or consider that free trial. See what your own data tells you.
We hope this deep dive gave you some things to think about, maybe opened up some new perspectives on consciousness and reality.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you tuning in. And hey, if you enjoyed this, please do like and subscribe. That way you won't miss our next deep dive into these kinds of fascinating topics.